Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So in this one, I wanted to really preview the NFL draft through the lens of the AFC East, right? Go through all four teams and kind of talk about draft needs, total picks, stuff like that, and really just try to figure out exactly what each team is thinking, right? What would be the most ideal draft for them. It's extremely important to keep an eye on what the division rivals are doing. So with that said, let's talk, I guess let's start with the first team in the draft, right? The first AFC East team in the draft, which is the New England Patriots, right? They have the third overall pick, and a lot of people, including myself, kind of feels like this is where the draft changes could come, right? Everybody knows Caleb is going to go one. Washington will go with the quarterback. I believe it's going to be Jaden Daniels, but if it's Drake May, it's Drake May. It's not going to be shocking anybody. I know there's some McCarthy buzz. Personally, I'm not buying into that at this point, but I think at 3 with New England, because they have so many roster needs, because there is a quarterback there that does make sense, because there's multiple teams that are looking to trade up, potentially the Broncos, the Vikings, the Raiders as well. Could that third overall pick be a trade up situation? I definitely think so. So let's take a look at New England's really draft outlook. So I would say this team's top 3 biggest needs are quarterback, left tackle, and wide receiver. Their top 3 draft picks are, of course, again, at spot number 3, at 34 in round 2, and then at 68 in round 3. They have 8 total picks with still $53 million in cap space. I mean, that is a freaking ton of cap space. New England can still go out there and make moves. I would say the players to watch at this point in time: Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy with that third pick. And then at round 2, I do feel like Jordan Morgan would make sense if they go with a quarterback up at the top of the draft. And then also Xavier Worthy. I think he would provide a lot of speed for that Patriots offense, something that they don't really have a lot of, at this point in time. And he would also be explosive. I think when you look at the Patriots, depth chart, they don't really have a lot of speed, much like the Giants. They don't really have a lot of speed, explosion, a lot of pop down the field. And Worthy, I do feel like, brings that. So when I'm thinking about what New England should do, I'm really down to 2 different scenarios, right? I think you can make an argument for a lot of different things. Drafting Marvin Harrison at 3, there's so many different possibilities, but I think the 2 things that I've narrowed it down to: number 1, just drafting the quarterback at 3, rolling Jacoby Brissett out there, and then targeting wide receiver or tackle in rounds 2 and 3. Right, so you get the 3 core pillars of the future moving forward, and let's just assume it's Drake May here for a second, but this goes for every quarterback. You do have that buffer with Brissett in there. So despite this Patriots team having, a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator / play caller, new system is going to be implemented, not much help at wide receiver, not much help on the offensive line. They couldn't really run the ball all that well, a year ago with Ramondre Stevenson and Zeke Elliott. A tight end room that is up there in age. You're not just throwing the rookie quarterback out there and just saying, save us, you're our savior, go out and be great. They're not in that position with Jacoby Brissett. Now, Brissett does have experience with AVP, so, I do feel like it will be a pretty seamless transition for those two to get on the same page and for the offense to look, I guess, relatively smoother than what you would typically see with a brand new coach, a brand new OC, and a brand new quarterback at the helm. I do feel like there is some continuity there. So that's one scenario, right? You take your franchise quarterback up at the top of the draft. You don't plan on being in the top, 5 in the draft moving forward. And you just don't think about it. You don't think too hard about it. You don't want to be the team that needs a quarterback, but then you pass on the next Justin Herbert, the next Josh Allen, the next whoever. I don't want to say Pat Mahomes, but the next whoever it is, Lamar. You don't want to be that team. Again, that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is trade down. I feel like maybe taking best player available here. Yeah, they would be a better football team, right? If they went with Marvin Harrison, if they went with Joe Alt, for sure, that they would be a much better football team with those players than without. But man, I feel like if a team, specifically the Vikings, they want to move up, to trade down from a top 3 pick when you know a team is coming up for a quarterback, you can charge a ton. You can charge, I mean, from Minnesota, you would get 11, 23, a 2025 first round pick plus more. So 3 first round picks plus more, right? If New England really wanted to, they can ask for, mid round picks as well. Minnesota would be inclined to do that. And also too, with other teams out there that are looking to move up, you can start a bidding war. So in this scenario here, New England would also have a chance of landing a quarterback at spot number 11, if one falls, right? I would assume probably JJ McCarthy. So if they like him, great, they take their quarterback of the future. You still have, your high-end second-round pick, your high-end third-round pick, plus all these picks from the Minnesota Vikings, including 23. So I think, in that scenario, again, if you like McCarthy, I'm personally not as high on him, but if you like JJ McCarthy and you're a Patriots fan, you trade down, you can maybe land him at 11 because you got to think, right? Minnesota's coming up to 3 to go land one of these quarterbacks. Whether they take McCarthy at 3, I mean, there's a possibility that one is going to be falling because, unless the Giants maybe pass on one at 6, but I don't want to dive too far down the rabbit hole here of different scenarios. The point is, you could potentially still land a quarterback at 11. If not, you can go out and land a tackle. You can go out and land a wide receiver there. And, you have all this extra draft capital. So I think the Patriots are in a super, super interesting position. But I do feel like the silver lining for New England, no matter what they do, right? They take Marvin Harrison at 3, they take Drake May at 3, they trade down and get a bunch of picks. New England is going to be walking away after draft night as a much, much better football team, right? That's just this team has a lot of holes. They have a lot of holes on this roster, so that allows them to be more flexible and free when it comes to the NFL draft. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins here for a second. And for me, I think the Dolphins are interesting because last season they made the playoffs, right? They had a great year. They made the playoffs. They lost to the Chiefs in round 1. And a lot of people were looking at Miami saying, oh, they're not real, they're not contenders, they're going to blow it. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody loses to the Chiefs in the playoffs, and Miami did have a bunch of injuries, right? We have to be objective and fair when we analyze this Dolphins playoff exit a year ago. And you're looking at the Dolphins offseason moves, they lost a lot of pieces, much like the Buffalo Bills, who we're going to talk about here in a second. But Miami had to make some pretty... Like, they lost Robert Hunt at guard. They had to release Xavier Howard. They had to make some pretty tough roster moves because of financial reasons. Now, when we take a look at the Dolphins' draft outlook, I would say the team's biggest needs: defensive tackle, guard, and offensive tackle depth, right? Because Armstead, he's not going to be around forever. I understand that they do have Austin Jackson, but ideally, in my opinion, you maybe want to get that tackle depth in the middle portion of this year's draft. So in the event that Armstead gets hurt or retires after the season, whatever it may be, you're not screwed there. The 3 top draft picks for Miami, 21, 55, and then they don't have a third round pick, so their next highest pick is round 4 at pick 158. 6 total picks in general. This team has $3 million in cap space at this point in time. And I would say that the players to watch are Graham Barton, tackle/guard from Duke, Troy Fontenot, guard/tackle from Washington, Byron Murphy, defensive tackle from Texas, and Drazon Newton. Now, personally, I think because Miami... they lose Hunt in free agency, right? Connor Williams was released coming off the ACL. They need more interior help. But this team did actually sign Aaron Brewer from the Tennessee Titans, who was a 2-year starter for them and was pretty consistent across the board. So I feel like center, that was a move that nobody talked about, right? Like, I'm talking I guess in the mainstream sports media world, not many people talked about Brewer, the Dolphins figuring out the center position prior to the draft. So there's not that... the immediate pressure, maybe 2 months ago, was, okay, Jackson Powers-Johnson, right? We got to make a full court press for him. Now that's not the case, right? The Dolphins freed up some opportunities there, if you will. So if the Dolphins want to try to replace Christian Wilkins on the defensive side of the football, they can surely go out and select Murphy. I do feel like there's a chance that he's going to be there, and that is just a nasty, nasty football player. I mean, he can rush the passer from the inside, which is huge. He can help stop the run. I'm a massive fan of Byron Murphy. As a Jet fan, I'll be pretty mad, pretty mad if he goes to Miami. But again, objectively here, it would be a smart move, a logical move for the Dolphins. But if you want to kick it back over to the offensive line, and you're not really forced into taking a center here, Graham Barton, that's the player that I feel like makes a ton of sense for what the Dolphins want to do schematically speaking, as well as Barton's flexibility at the position, right? Again, Miami does have some interior question marks at this point in time. Barton can come in and do that. If you want him to kick outside the tackle next year, if Armstead retires, he can go out and do that, right? He's one of the most, I would say, the most versatile and flexible offensive linemen in this entire draft. I think Barton, and he's currently being mocked right around that 31 spot to San Francisco, but I feel like Miami in the early 20s, he's just going to be that hard hat type of player. I feel like he would make a lot of sense. Okay, next up here is the Buffalo Bills, another really intriguing team to watch because Buffalo, like Miami, had to make some financial decisions with their roster, but unlike Miami, I feel like Buffalo's departures aren't going to be as big of a deal as kind of what we're hearing from, again, like the mainstream sports and media world. They're making it out to seem like Buffalo is screwed. Their playoff window is closing and whatnot. But the reality is a lot of these players are up there in age. They're older. In some cases, they're just hurt and they're not even playing, right? This team had to part ways with Tre'Davious White. They're going to save $10 million in the summer as a post-June 1st release here. At the end of the day, Trey White didn't even play. He missed a ton of time due to injury, right? At some point, the team had to move on from Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. They, as much as I love them, right? High defensive IQs, clutch tackles, clutch plays, and whatnot. They both did a great job playing together. They had chemistry, but I feel like at this point going into 2024, the speed was not there. So what do? They go out and they re-up Taylor Rapp, formerly of the LA Rams, but spent last season with the Bills, made some clutch plays for them. A young safety that has spent a year in the system, that watched Poyer and Hyde play, that eventually had to take over late in the season and again made some plays. So they did that. They brought in Mike Edwards. I think the most notable departures, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis. But if you watch the Bills play late into the season, or really once Joe Brady took over, there was a big emphasis on targeting the tight end position. Dalton Kincaid over the middle of the field. Dawson Knox is on a big contract, right? James Cook in the passing game. It really seemed like the offense went up the seams more as opposed to perimeter focused. I think Gabe Davis is not trying to be blunt or rude here or anything like that, but I do feel like Gabe Davis is one of the more overrated players in football. And then with Stephon Diggs, I talked about it in the trade video where he got dealt to Houston. I kind of view it as a win-win, to be honest. It does seem like Buffalo's moving on a year too early. They would rather move on a year too early than a year too late. But to get a second-round pick for a receiver who was causing problems in the locker room, kind of a headache, you have to deal with the social media stuff, 31 years old, and just seemed like he was being phased out once Joe Brady took over and he's now the team's permanent offensive coordinator. I just kind of feel like that was great value. I mean, you look at the value, look at the trade compensation that these other receivers were going for. Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, Keenan Allen got traded for a 4th-round pick. So these receivers aren't going for much. Diggs, you're getting a future second with, and you're eliminating a potential headache in the locker room, right? I do feel like we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, but that doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for wide receiver. Yes, they brought in Curtis Samuel, but let's take a look at the Bills draft outlook. So for me, the top 3 biggest needs: wide receiver, safety, and corner. Top draft picks: 28 in round 1, 60 in round 2, no 3rd round pick. So their next highest is in round 4 here at 128. They have 10 total picks. $2.8 million in cap space. Players to watch: Brian Johnson Jr., Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, Adonai Mitchell, and Tyler Nubin, safety from Minnesota. I personally wouldn't rule out a Bills trade up. We have heard multiple teams interested in wanting to move down. I doubt the Bills would trade up with the Jets just because they're a division rival. But the Bears have also been a team that looks to want to move out of spot number 9. Right? If Rome Odunze is on the board and the Bills want to, they, again, 10 total picks in this year's class. They have 2 second-round picks next year, They got the extra second round pick from the Stephon Diggs trade. I mean, the Bills honestly have enough ammunition to shoot up to the top of the draft if there's a team that wants to move down into the late 20s here. But if not, I feel like Troy Franklin will probably be the pick for Buffalo here in round 1. To me, if you read the tea leaves, Franklin would, of course, good player, provide speed and whatnot, good offensive systematic fit deep down the field. And he would also take some of the pressure off of the interior or the inside of the Buffalo Bills passing game. But if you look at how interested the Bills have been in him, I mean, we're talking top 30 visit, combine meetings, private workouts, right? Everything that you could possibly think of with Troy Franklin and the Buffalo Bills, or any sort of meeting or scouting or anything like that to take place between a team and a player. The Bills have done that with Troy Franklin. So I feel like where there's smoke, there's fire here. That could very well be the pick. But if they want to go with a young safety like Tyler Nubin or Cam Kitchens potentially in round 2, I feel like that would make a lot of sense. And then corner, I feel like is another underrated need, and I could see Sean McDermott just saying, "Screw it, I'm a defensive guy. We gotta get more help outside of Benford and Rasul Douglas." So, the Bills can go in a bunch of different ways, but I do feel like at the end of the day, it'll because I initially would have said defensive tackle, but they have made a lot of moves bringing in older veterans on 1-year contracts. I just don't know if the Bills would then want to go out and invest another first-round pick. Rousseau was a first-round pick, and Oliver was a first-round pick. They're investing so much in the defensive line. I think their focus should probably be on the perimeter, whether that's defensively or offensively. All right, and last but not least here, we got the New York Jets left. And as we all know, they got the 10th pick in the draft. Much like the Patriots, the Jets can walk away from draft night going with a myriad of different players, and we're going to be a much better football team, right? We don't like the way I'm kind of viewing the Jets, because I know there's been sections of the fan base that have been divided on who the Jets should select with the 10th overall pick. You have your offensive line camp, you have your Brock Bowers camp, you have the trade down camp. I think the reality is, if the Jets draft Brock Bowers, we're getting the best tight end on the football team. We're giving Aaron Rodgers a security blanket. We're giving an immediate threat over the middle of the field. We're getting somebody to build around, right? I would consider Brock Bowers, probably when he hits the NFL, one of the best young tight ends in football for the next 4 to 5 seasons on a cheap rookie contract. Somebody to take pressure off of Breece Hall in the running game, somebody to take pressure off of Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams on the outside, and somebody who I feel like could dominate off of play action, which is what the Jets want to do a lot of this upcoming season: run the ball, play action, with, of course, Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers has never really had that, crazy tight end threat really in his entire career. So Brock Bowers gives you that upside. Makes a lot of sense, right? If you want to pass on Brock Bowers, right? I don't want to take a tight end that early. That's totally cool, right? The Jets really need depth at offensive line. I love Tyron Smith. I love Morgan Moses. But looking at the Jets' track record of injuries, year after year after year after year, specifically on the offensive line, looking at Tyron Smith's track record of injuries year after year after year, has not played a full season since 2015, always seeming to get banged up in one way or another, right? Neck injury, back injury, hamstring injury. I just realistically can't, could it happen? For sure. I just realistically can't buy into Tyron Smith playing every snap of every game this entire season, 17 games, and then being 100% ready to go for a playoff run. I just can't. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm pessimistic here, but at 33 years old, with just a long list of injuries, and also understanding that no other team out there outside of Dallas was willing to give him a contract, I do feel like that is a bit alarming, in my opinion, if I'm just being honest, right? I think in the case of Morgan Moses, obviously up there in age as well, was injured last season, and you have to ask the question, why, as much as Morgan Moses is an upgrade on this football team, why would the Baltimore Ravens, a team that, has Super Bowl expectations every single year, a team that expects to make the playoffs every single year, no matter what, why would they let him go with no set plan for a pick swap? To me, that just doesn't make all that much sense, right? So as much as I love these acquisitions for the Jets on the surface, as far as the length, the durability is concerned, to me, that's in question. So if you want to target offensive line, I would freaking love that. Olu Fashanu, JC Latham, Talese Fuaga, whoever it is, right? Trade down Amarius Mims, whoever it is. I think the Jets have a unique situation on their hands where, let's just take Olu, for example. This is probably my number one route that I would go at this point in time. If you take Olu at spot number 10, he doesn't have to play right away. He has elite pass blocking abilities. We know how good of a prospect Olu is, but the one knock on Olu, the one or two knocks, he might need some time on the bench, and the running game production could get a little bit better, but that should get better with time as he grows, as he gets stronger, as he gets more games and practices under his belt. I'm looking at the Jets as like the perfect landing spot for Olu because they have a guy in Tyron Smith who can play, but he's clearly not the long-term answer, right? Think about this too for a second. Tyron Smith is a former All-Pro beast. All-Pro beast. The amount of knowledge that Tyron Smith can give to Fashanu, take him under his wing, kind of like the big brother mentality, I think that would be freaking awesome, right? Fashanu sits on the bench for 10 weeks. Oh, Tyron Smith gets hurt or whatever it is. I don't want to try to predict an injury or anything like that, obviously, but again, just looking at the resume, Tyron Smith does get hurt. So is it realistic to say that there's a chance Tyron Smith could miss some time this season? Yeah, I do think that's realistic. So you would have a guy in Olu to where the season isn't blown, right? The tackle position isn't just a turnstile for the rest of the year, right? Because, Tyron Smith playing 13 games sounds good on paper, but what's happening in the 14th, the 15th, the 16th, the 17th game? Think about the AFC wildcard, the AFC standings. You're not seeing a 4-game difference between these teams. It's like a half game, 10-7, 9-8. One game could ruin it all. And I don't want to have a game ruined by not having depth at the tackle position. And also, you're getting a franchise left tackle, for years to come. We're seeing what these left tackles are getting paid. It's a ton of money. Olu would be coming in on a cheap deal. So that's just one scenario here on the offensive line. But you can make that argument with, again, Fuaga, Mims, Latham, whoever you want. And then wide receiver is another interesting option, right? I'm a massive, massive fan of Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas, to me, provides so much explosion on the perimeter, right? He could hurt teams deep down the field. He would give Rodgers this, playmaking threat, and much like Bowers, would take pressure off of the other guys. A dynamic athlete, somebody who could hurt teams over the middle of the field. Big-bodied, 6'3", 6'4", 17 touchdowns a year ago as the wide receiver 2 for LSU. Are you kidding me? 17 touchdowns in one season, 17 receiving touchdowns. So he's not like McCaffrey where he's kind of doing everything. No, 17 receiving touchdowns. That's insanity. That's nuts. So to take a guy in Brian Thomas, I think would make so much sense. Even though 10 is considered a little high, I think Brian Thomas is like that dude. I think he's going to be great. But what happens if Neighbors falls, if Rome Odunze falls? Would you consider him a 10? I think the answer is yeah. You'd have to consider it for a lot of the same reasons, right? So I think the Jets can go in a bunch of different ways. Oh, and then trade down, right? If the Jets want to move back to the mid-teens, if they want to move back into the 20s, yeah, I'm totally fine recouping a second-round pick. I'm totally fine picking up a future 1 or a future 2, whatever it is, for this Jets squad. We don't have... we traded, obviously, the Rodgers. We don't have a second-round pick this year because of the Rodgers trade, but we also lost another future pick for the Hassan Reddick deal. So it would be nice to kind of recoup some of these draft picks. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And as always, go Jets.